I'd call the member for Newtown.
Thank you, Speaker. Look, the Minister just referred to the fact that he was gobsmacked that we're here debating this disallowance motion and referred to this motion as ingenuous, disingenuous, thank you to the member for Cessnock for the correction. Hypocritical indeed. The issue here is that while I know full well that the opposition that sits behind me is no friend of renters, that the New South Wales Labor government, in relation to this change of regulation, has failed, as the Minister just did in a 10-minute speech, has failed to explain why we have seen a change to the regulations. There was absolutely no explanation as to why the regulations changed. And I would ask the Minister, because at this point we're in a situation where we have to start questioning whether or not the House is being misled as to the intentions of the government, because the Minister came in here and explained to us what would be in the regulations. The Minister actually said, and I make it very clear, that it was necessary to have evidence requirements as a way to, and I quote, deter landlords or agents from using a termination ground that is not genuine, and to provide renters with confidence that the termination provisions are being used appropriately. We then, on the 19th of May, the historical version of the Residential Tenancies Act regulation has detailed. Part 1, A, has the written statement. Let's note it's not even a stat dec. And the second requires one of the following. And you'll see it's not a minor change. There's actually a B, 1, 2, 3, Roman numeral 4, 5, Roman numeral, and then 2, that makes it very clear what additional evidence would be required. Because I don't think a letter and a statement from a dodgy landlord telling someone that they have to be evicted because they might be intending to renovate a property is evidence. That's not evidence. That is a dodgy landlord using a loophole to undermine Labor congratulating themselves for ending unfair no grounds evictions. And the Minister says it's a minor change, but I mean, if you take a bucket and put a small hole in it and try and keep it full, it will not work. Because what the government is doing with changing these regulations is putting a massive loophole into the reforms after they celebrated them. Now, this motion seeks to disallow the Residential Tenancies Amendment Termination Notice for Significant Renovations or Repairs Regulation 2025, which was published on June 20 this year, and waters down the reforms to end no grounds evictions that passed this Parliament with multi-partisan support, including from the opposition, in October 2024. Those reforms were passed on the understanding, Minister, that certain evidence requirements would have been met by landlords wishing to claim a specific ground for evicting someone. I say understanding because the requirements are contained in regulations, which at that stage had not been drafted. No one had seen them. The consultation had occurred, and we were informed that when we would consider the legislation that indeed we would see those regulations later. Based on our many discussions with the Minister's office over many, many months, in October 2024, we understood that landlords wanting to evict a tenant on the grounds of significant renovations or repairs to the premises would need to supply evidence like a development consent or quote or contract from a licensed contractor. It wouldn't be enough just to make a statement. This understanding was then reflected in the regulations that came into effect on May 19 this year. And the Minister talks about the extensive consultation that occurred, and that is absolutely true. But that extensive consultation predated the development of the legislation and indeed the drafting of the regulations. As far as we are aware, no consultation, indeed no extensive consultation occurred between May 19 this year, and indeed when the regulations were changed. The initial regulations required a written quotation or contract from a qualified builder or tradesperson for the works or an owner-builder permit authorising the landlord to carry out the works themselves, proof of purchase of materials related to the works, development consent, written approval from the Owners Corp, Strata Committee or Strata Managing Agent, or a development control order requiring the works to be carried out. As we've heard in the second reading speech, the Minister described the evidence requirements as a way to deter landlords or agents from using termination grounds that is not genuine and to provide renters with confidence. And now that confidence is gone. When the evidence requirement finally came into force in May 19, nearly 7 months after the legislation was passed, the government made a massive song and dance celebrating how they were the friends of renters. They held a press conference around the corner from the Tenants' Union's own celebration in Martin Place, and the Minister said, "The implementation of these reforms creates a fairer, more balanced rental market that gives tenants greater security while making sure owners have clear and transparent processes to follow. We've listened to renters, owners and the industry experts to shape these changes and have worked closely with stakeholders to ensure the transition is smooth and well understood." The Premier himself took to Instagram boasting of entering a new era of renting. Job done from the New South Wales Labor Party. Renting was made fair. Well, at least for about a month.
4 weeks.
Then something happened. We don't know what happened, but sometime between May and June, there was a lot less fanfare about this, but on June 20, the regulations came into effect. The government quietly removed the requirement for any evidence, and then we're gone. So what happened? Now a landlord who wants to evict a tenant on the grounds of repairs or renovations just needs to write a statement, not even sign a stat dec, claiming they will undertake the works that will be legally enough for them to be able to evict someone from their home. So what changed? What is the reason? We still do not know. We heard from the Minister for 10 minutes just then, and we still have no idea what changed. I would suggest that the Greens, and I note the member for Ballina and the member for Balmain are also in the chamber very concerned about this disallowance. I would posit a guess that the stakeholders that the Greens talk to and the stakeholders that the member for Willoughby talk to in relation to rental reform in this state are probably quite different. And my understanding is not a single one of them were engaged and consulted between May and June when these regulations changed.
Correct.
So what happened? What occurred? Well, we could ask some questions about how many landlords there are in Cabinet. We could ask some questions about how the internal Labor Party processes work. We could ask some questions about who is running this government and whether the Minister indeed gets to draft the regulations himself, or if everything is run through the Premier's office, and the Premier's office has a say over what happens on every tiny minutiae that occurs in this place. We could ask the same questions about why all of those on the government benches signed a statement and a pledge to injured workers and then overturned their commitment to that once they came into place. Or we could start to assume that the way that the New South Wales Labor government is intending to work is to say one thing in the public and do another thing in law, because we have had no explanation from the Minister in relation to this disallowance motion. Now, I know and I hear the Minister's pain when he says that there is hypocrisy from the opposition coming in here and pretending they care about renters. But that does not make it okay to not explain to this House, to this Parliament, what changed between May and June to see the evidence requirements removed. Because we need to be concerned about the impact that property developers, that big investors, that people that are profiting from this housing crisis have over our democracy. We need to be concerned about the influence that big money and big profits from housing and developers have over our democracy in this state. And so when regulations change from May to June, with no evidence from the real estate lobby, no evidence from the tenants' advocates that they actually were consulted about this change, no demonstration from Fair Trading about why the change was needed, we need to ask serious questions. And I can make it very clear that the Greens will be looking much more closely into what occurred between May and June for indeed those changes to happen. So I would ask the Minister to seek leave and provide on the record a genuine explanation as to what happened and why we shouldn't be disallowing these regulations. Because without that explanation, we are not in a position to allow these changes to the regulations to continue, because we have no evidence no explanation, and indeed no details about what took place, and it is incumbent on the Parliament to make sure that we uphold the commitments that we made when the legislation was passed. The Greens will support the disallowance motion.
Thank the